The night was only beginning to fade, and in a restaurant with panoramic windows in downtown Chicago, the last lights went out. At the table sat a man whose face was printed in magazines, featured in television programs, whispered about in elite corridors. Millionaire, investor, magnate. His name was Richard Hale. Before him lay a stack of papers, yet he didn't even glance at them. He was accustomed to sealing deals with a flick of his hand, accustomed to every step being accompanied by respect, envy, and fear. And suddenly someone appeared beside him, a wanderer, Samuel, a drifter, ordinary, filthy, hungry, with eyes in which thousands of lived miseries seemed to intertwine. He trembled, stretched out his hand, and whispered, "Give me scraps, and I'll teach you how to walk." Richard at first didn't understand. What kind of madness was this? His lips stretched into a grin, and then he burst into laughter, loud as thunder. He laughed at the pitifulness of the request, at the thought that anyone dared offer him. A man with a personal chef and a wine collection, more valuable than entire apartments. Such a trade. Food for the ability to walk. After all, he could already walk. He commanded the world. But Samuel did not avert his gaze. His eyes burned as though he knew something no one else knew. And the longer the moment lasted, the quieter Richard's laughter became. In the restaurant, where just a second ago glitter had reigned, now only the breathing of two men could be heard. "Fine," Richard said, playing along. "Take your crumbs. Show me your miracle." He pushed forward a plate with leftovers that even a waiter would have scowled at. The drifter seized them, chewing greedily, as though in those remains lay life itself. His hands trembled, but strength appeared in his eyes. And then he said, "Stand." Richard snorted. "I stand every day." But Samuel shook his head. "You don't walk. You move your legs, but you don't walk. Do you want to understand?" At that instant, something strange, something cold, ran down Richard's spine. The air seemed heavier to breathe. He took a step, and suddenly realized that for the first time, the ground beneath him felt alive. He felt its unevenness, heard the creak of leather shoes, sensed muscles working differently than ever before. Something inside him trembled. Suddenly, the restaurant vanished. The walls dissolved, the city's noise disappeared. He was standing on an empty street in Detroit, darkness all around, only Samuel beside him. "You laughed," the drifter said quietly, "but in 23 minutes, you'll forget who you once were." Richard tried to protest, but his tongue grew heavy, words stuck. The world warped. For the first time in years, he felt fear. His expensive suit seemed to collapse into shapeless cloth. He looked at his hands and saw wrinkles he had never noticed. In Samuel's eyes, something more was reflected, as if an abyss stood behind the man. "You want to learn to walk? Truly walk? Then leave everything behind." Richard clenched his fists, tried to summon his usual sarcasm, but his voice trembled. You're a fraud." "No," Samuel replied. "You've been lying to yourself your entire life. You didn't walk. You ran, you hid, you bought roads, but you never felt them. Now you have a chance." And he urged Richard forward. The ground beneath his feet turned damp. The stench of rot filled his nose. He turned. Behind him no longer the restaurant, but an abandoned street where shadows prowled. Dogs barked in the distance. A door slammed somewhere. And suddenly Richard realized the 23 minutes had already begun. Each instant stretched into eternity. Each motion exposed his weakness. Samuel walked lightly, almost dancing on the grime. "Watch your step," he whispered. "If you fall now, you'll never rise again." For the first time in his life, Richard felt that each step might be his last. His heart pounded as though it would burst. Panic swelled, and yet with it came a strange sense of freedom. He saw trash glitter, raindrops reflecting dim light. He saw more than before. And then a question rose in him. What if this drifter wasn't a man at all? What if he was a guide? And where was he leading him? Time melted like wax on a candle. 19 minutes. The world was no longer what it had been, and Richard didn't know if he wanted to go back. His heart thundered like a drum, and Richard couldn't understand. Where did this trembling, this weakness come from, when he was always used to controlling every motion, every word, every glance? His empires had fallen and risen anew. He had lost millions in a minute and won them back just as fast, never allowing himself to seem vulnerable. But now, on this wet street, under the whisper of a strange drifter, he felt like a child learning to take his first step. It seemed that the asphalt beneath his feet had its own life, that every stone breathed, that the world no longer belonged to him, but rather he himself had become a toy in the hands of something vast and incomprehensible. "Look," Samuel said, "you walk." "But you don't yet walk," Richard exhaled heavily. "Enough of these riddles. What do you want? Money? A house?" "I can buy you anything," Samuel laughed softly, but the laugh was like the scrape of a knife on glass. "You always think you can buy the road, but the road is not for sale. The road must be felt. You'll never know what it means to walk until you understand that your steps don't belong to you, but to the path itself." The words sank deep, and Richard was frightened by the fact that they sounded like truth. He wanted to brush it off, but his legs carried him forward on their own. The street pulled him in. Each moment felt like a trial. Each movement brought pain, but with the pain came wild pleasure, as though he were being reborn. "How much time?" he asked, not knowing why. 16 minutes, Samuel replied like a sentence. Richard clenched his teeth, his mind flashing. What would happen when it ended? He tried to slow down, but his legs no longer obeyed. The world shifted. Buildings turned gray, windows hollow like skulls. Shadows thickened, as if someone lurked behind each corner. And in that crushing darkness, the only light was Samuel's eyes, glowing like embers in a fire, burning with a heat that made Richard want to hide and draw closer at once. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Good. That means you're still alive." Richard wanted to shout that he feared nothing, that he had built everything he wanted, but his voice broke. His throat tightened, words stuck. Instead, he whispered, "Who are you?" Samuel looked straight into his heart and said, "I am the one who walked when all others stood. And now it's your turn." Suddenly the ground beneath them groaned, as if a giant hatch were opening. Richard stumbled and nearly fell. Below yawned a darkness thick as tar. Samuel stepped straight into it and disappeared, leaving only a whisper. "If you want to learn, follow me." Richard froze at the edge. His mind screamed, "Stop! This is the end." But in his chest burned something else. Desire. Desire to know. Desire to go where he had never been. He stepped. The world flipped. He felt as though he was falling for centuries, his whole life flashing before his eyes. He saw his childhood, his first dollar, the betrayal of partners, luxurious banquets, false smiles. All of it collapsed, vanished, melted until at last he landed on solid ground. Around him was forest, dense, wild, dark. Trees reached skyward like colossal bones. Silence rang so hard his ears hurt. Only Samuel's steps ahead. 13 minutes, Samuel said without turning. "Will you make it? Or remain here forever?" Richard rose. His knees shook, but he moved. Each step came heavy, as if the forest resisted. Branches clawed at his clothes, the earth dragged him down. But with each step, his body changed, lighter, stronger, more alive. He walked, and for the first time it mattered. For the first time he felt he wasn't walking for goals, money, or fame, but simply because the path demanded it. Deep in his heart, something clicked, like a lock that had long imprisoned his soul. And in that moment he knew Samuel was not lying. He was truly teaching him how to walk. But why? Why him? What would happen when time ran out? The forest thickened as though it wanted to swallow him, erase all memory of what came before. Branches whipped his face, earth sank beneath him, and every step hurt as if millions of needles pierced his feet. Yet in that pain was clarity. He felt real, alive, unchained from golden comforts. Samuel walked ahead lightly, almost floating, his silhouette sometimes dissolving among trees, then reappearing. "You begin to understand," he said without turning, "but you cling too much to the old." Richard gritted his teeth. "I cling to nothing." "Lies." "You always lie, to yourself, to others, to life. Until you let go, your legs will snag, and the ground will pull you down." The words struck deep. Richard remembered building empires without meeting the eyes of those he ruined. He remembered women leaving him saying, "You don't live, you just count." He remembered children who saw only cold authority, not a father. It all crashed down, and steps grew heavier. 10 minutes, Samuel said, the countdown slicing like a blade. The forest shifted. Ahead glimmered faint fires, flickering like campfires where shadows sat. He stepped closer and saw people, their faces familiar. Former partners, enemies, those he betrayed, even those whose names he'd forgotten. They sat silently watching him, with no anger, no forgiveness, only waiting. "These are your roads," Samuel said. "You passed by them, didn't stop, didn't notice." Yet they were part of the path. Cold shivered his back. He wanted to turn away, but couldn't. Each face reflected a piece of himself. "Why show me this?" he forced out. "Because walking means remembering all, not only brilliance, but darkness. If you turn away, the road won't let you pass." He froze. His hands shook, eyes burned, and for the first time he lowered his head and whispered, "Forgive me." No one answered, but the fires blazed brighter, shadows dissolved. Samuel nodded. "Now you can continue." Richard felt his legs lighter as though a stone dropped from them. Yet his heart pounded faster. He knew time was running out. 7 minutes, Samuel said. They went deeper into the woods, air growing heavy, every breath tearing lungs. Suddenly a howl rang ahead. From the darkness emerged hulking shapes with eyes like embers. Richard recoiled, heart stopped. "This is your fear," Samuel said calmly. "All your life you ran from it, hid behind money and walls. But the road takes only those who walk through fear, not around it." The shapes crept closer, growling, their hot breath near, ready to tear him apart. Richard wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Something broke within, and he stepped toward them. Each step was a plunge into the abyss. The beast circled, hissed, yet never touched him. He walked through and realized they were smoke, shadows born of doubt. Emerging on the other side, they vanished. Samuel's voice came. 5 minutes. The forest opened. Before them lay a clearing bathed in moonlight. In its center stretched an ancient stone road leading into infinity. It gleamed as though stars had fallen to earth. Richard stopped. His chest sang, tears welled. He knew this was the path Samuel spoke of. "But why me?" he asked, breathless. Samuel turned for the first time. In his face, Richard suddenly recognized himself. worn, withered, eyes stripped of falsehood. Because you always sought it. You just didn't know. But time is nearly gone. The world quaked. Stones of the road trembled. Forest melted into darkness. 4 minutes, Samuel whispered, his voice a final test. The world vibrated, as if a vast machine's gears were breaking. Trees shattered like glass. Earth trembled, each breath harder. Richard stood before the shining road, knowing it was not just a path, but the last threshold. Samuel stepped closer. 3 minutes. If you don't step now, you'll remain forever, prisoner of your walls, money, fears. No second chance. Richard closed his eyes. Images of his life. Lavish parties, deals, golden watches, private jets, all now cheap illusions. None weighed against the shining road. He understood. All those years he never walked. He merely slid along. Now he had a chance. But terror gripped him. Hands shook. 2 minutes, Samuel said. Richard asked, and if I step, what becomes of me? Samuel smiled, both merciful and merciless. You will cease to be who you were. You will become who you always should have been. But you can't return flame ignited in his chest. He stepped. First one, then another. Stones glowed brighter, his body lighter, bones and muscles replaced with strings of light. Everything excess slipped away, suit, mask, pride, coldness. Only he remained, true. 1 minute, Samuel spoke. But his voice was Richard's own, for no one else was there. Samuel had dissolved, and Richard knew. Samuel had always been himself, his hidden part that knew how to walk but had stayed silent. Time stretched, heart thundered. He took the final step, and the road exploded in light. His body dissolved in radiance, yet his consciousness did not vanish. Instead, he saw everything. He walked along a road stretching through forests, cities, deserts, oceans. He felt every blade of grass, every person, every breath. He walked, and the road walked him. And he understood. To walk is to be part of everything, not to own everything. Only in this lies freedom. The world quaked again, and light engulfed him. The last seconds became eternity. And when all grew quiet, the lights of the restaurant in Chicago flared once more. Richard sat at the same table, papers before him as though nothing had changed. But he looked at his hands. They were alive. He stood, took a step, and for the first time felt that he walked. The waiter stared, surprised. Sir, are you all right? Richard smiled. Now, yes. No one understood what had happened in those 23 minutes. No one but him. Sometimes the greatest trials come not from without, but from within. Richard did not need to fight enemies or prove his power. He already owned everything touchable. But behind all the glitter lurked hollow echo. He had been taught not by a man from the street, but by himself. That voice that for years tried to break through the rustle of bills, the clinking of glasses, the applause at banquets. He hadn't heard it until the moment when time squeezed into 23 minutes. That was his trial, his chance. The story of how he walked through forests and shadows, how he heard voices, was no journey through the outer world. It was a journey inward, to the place most frightening to look, because there lay the true face. Samuel was his reflection, his soul, drained and parched but unbroken. It waited only for the moment he dared release everything and take a step without calculation. A step without profit, a step for the sake of the path itself. People think they walk every day, but really they just flee fear, spin in circles, stumble on the past. Only those who stop, hear silence, and then go again, truly go, discover that life is not in owning. Life is in being. Richard realized it too late for many, but just in time for himself. And when he left the restaurant that night, his steps no longer echoed hollowly. Each strike of his heel on the ground was melody. He looked at the lamps, the rain, the people, and all was part of the road. He was not higher than others, nor lower. He simply walked, and in that lay greatness. Perhaps he would lose his millions. Perhaps tomorrow newspapers would forget his name. But it no longer mattered, because he had found what no money could buy, the ability to walk. And Samuel? He vanished with the darkness. But sometimes when Richard looked into a shop window and saw his reflection, it seemed that deep in his eyes still burned that same fire. And it reminded him, the road is endless. The only question is, will you dare take the first step when all you're offered are mere scraps?